To understand what really happened to the economy in 2008, you have to go back to the time of the savings and loan crisis, commonly referred to as the S&L scandal that began in the 1980s. It happened back when $1 billion was still a lot of money. So when it wound up costing banks and taxpayers hundreds of billions of dollars, we should have figured out what we still haven't seemed to figure out yet, that producing product and services is what grows an economy and quality of life, not new gimmicks that allow bankers to pay themselves more money than they could ever possibly spend so they don't feel left out of the billionaire or now trillionaires club. But since we love our rich people so much, we let them keep playing with our economy like it's a sport where the best athlete is decided by who has the most gold medals rather than what kind of economic performance they can deliver us for all the money they make. A decade after civil rights laws were passed, enforcing equal access to job markets for blacks in 1973, most blacks were still living below the poverty line. They'd, however, made significant strides in politics. So when they demanded more jobs, America jumped at the opportunity to help them using the only tactic we seem to know how to deploy to solve problems anymore. We threw lots of money at it. The problem was that economically depressed areas most blacks lived in didn't have many businesses, even if whites were willing to hire them. Commuting to where jobs were meant owning a reliable car and having insurance, obstacles that most middle-class Americans wouldn't give a second thought to. But when you got nothing, owning a car is out of reach. So federally backed funds were made available to community savings and loans to lend to blacks on easy terms to start businesses with. This had meager success because whites weren't generally contracting out to black businesses to work for them, while blacks themselves didn't have any money to hire them either. These loans, however, were something banks wanted to lend out because there were heavy incentives for them to do so. So they got creative in finding ways to meet the requirements for helping minorities any way they could. It was eventually discovered that building shopping centers and malls that were close enough to white suburbs to support stores built there, while also close enough to black neighborhoods to hire them to build and then run the stores once they opened, met the necessary standard. It took a little finagling, but once political leaders got behind the idea, shopping centers started popping up wherever there were black communities near white suburbs. The problems that led to the savings and loan crash was twofold. One was that bankers financed shopping centers on top of credit given for other shopping centers already built that hadn't become operational yet. They eventually built hundreds, even thousands of malls and shopping centers into a pyramid scheme, knowing that it would eventually crash in on itself. But the incentives paid to loan officers for making the loans were made good on before seeing a dime come back in payments. Since there wasn't much of a need for many of the shopping centers built, mostly because we didn't have enough different and affordable genres of products available to fill them with, the scheme went bankrupt, leaving hundreds of empty and bankrupt shopping malls in its wake. Since these were community savings and loans, they couldn't be allowed to fail. So the American taxpayer was forced to bail them out while the people that caused it walked away with their pockets full of cash. This eventually did work to provide a better economy and offer an opportunity to African Americans as more lenient import-export laws opened up trade with other countries. This allowed a flood of cheap foreign products to fill those empty shopping centers with, while giving birth to a new age of American consumerism and the industrialization of the Third World. It also provided a source of minimum and low-wage jobs for blacks, allowing them access to better housing and educations. So blacks became upwardly mobile while new laws were passed that allowed banks to build pyramid schemes legally so they could help the economy grow without breaking the law. Basically, what was done illegally to cause the S&L crisis was legalized by allowing loans rated with a high probability of being paid back to be securitized so they could be booked as assets on banks' books or sold. This seemed to solve the growing African American poverty rate problem until the 1990s, when blacks who weren't upwardly mobile but dedicated and trusted low-wage workers, like those who did the heavy lifting around shopping centers and businesses that sprang up around them, were finding out that no matter how hard they tried, even if they could afford it by working 2 or 3 jobs, couldn't get loans to buy homes because they didn't make enough money an hour to qualify. So they demanded that the minimum wage be raised to a living wage, which would have caused wages for jobs just above minimum wage to rise as well. Politicians who supported this, mostly Democrats, in fact I think solely Democrats, cited how everyone had benefited from trickle-down economics but the people who had made it all possible by being the labor and management force that serviced the markets that provided it for us. Those at the top had made millions and even billions of dollars off the strong backs of our minimum wage workforce, while many workers had nothing to show for their efforts but unpaid bills. Wall Street, however, refused to agree to a minimum living wage around $10 or $11 an hour, the amount needed to qualify for a low-grade home loan for our blue-collar workforce. But it was agreed that workers should be able to buy homes instead of pay rent so they could begin to build equity towards their future security. Bill Clinton had already led efforts that got many blacks off welfare and into low-wage jobs with his welfare reform programs. The next step for them was owning homes, or they might as well have stayed on welfare. So Bush came up with the term ownership society and began to allow easier access to home loans through Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, where as long as proof could be provided that loan payments could be made, it was approved. The Democrats agreed to this, ending their bid for higher wages, which I thought was a mistake. The problem with trickle-down economics is that money never trickles down. It's lent down and has to be paid back up with interest. So money only enters our markets in such a way that we always owe more back than is available. What I mean is that rich people don't shop in the ghetto or suburbs. They buy their products through niche markets well out of the reach of the average American business ability to provide. So most money that flows into the lower levels of society is loaned to businesses that service them with interest due back. That means there's always less money on the streets than the amount owed the banks because interest is always piling up on whatever money is borrowed into the market, meaning at the end of the month, some people are going to be squeezed out of the rat race altogether. This is where homelessness comes from. They're the losers of the rat race we're all contestants in, where the finish line is paying our bills on time or we're kicked to the curb. Our bills are paid with money that's not trickling, but flowing, even flooding like an uphill river into rich people's pockets. Once they get it, the cycle only continues if more loans with more interest due back on them are lent out on the next trickle-down swing through the lower and middle class, collecting more profits as they go, while leaving an ever-increasing higher numbers of workers who fell out of the race in its wake. So the people at the top make profits and interest, then won't let the money come back down to earth to grow new products and services without more interest being piled on top of it. If they continue the process by hiring those at the bottom to personally work for them, meaning moving into their neighborhoods and letting them provide the kinds of high-dollar goods and services they're accustomed to, or allowed businesses to pay higher wages to employees rather than sending it all back to investors so fast, then money wouldn't always be heading in that one uphill direction. Everyone who uses money as it makes its way back to Wall Street pays interest and taxes every time it changes hands. Of course, once a banker gets his grubby paws on it, he has to make money off it again, while the people below him have to keep borrowing in order to pump more money into the economy for the rest of us to try and grab pieces of as it flows back to the banker again. Either that or the economy would crash because we could no longer afford to pay our bills because there simply wouldn't be enough money on the streets for everyone to be able to use, which is what has happened to the economy that led to where we are right now. But it didn't happen the way you were told. The way to have avoided all this would have been to have raised credit ratings for low-income Americans through creating the living wage instead of lowering terms for loans, just like Democrats had first tried to do. Since money always flows uphill, the banker will always get his share. By not allowing a living wage, not only is the amount of money on the streets too little to ensure the credit market doesn't crash, what little is on the streets gets squeezed back out again so fast that it doesn't have time to be spent but a few times before it goes back into the banker's pocket. The excuse for not giving a living wage was that there wasn't enough money in the economy to support it, while big businesses weren't willing to give up profits to pay their workers even if there was enough money. If, however, they had followed through with this living wage, the truth of the matter would have been that low-wage workers would have been able to begin to consume the products they produce rather than just pay their bills in order to survive. This would have been an overall boom in real consumer spending, benefiting both Wall Street and government through profits and taxes. This would have set a new economic standard that would have prevented future economic bust from having such devastating consequences while we're trying to get back on our feet, like the kind of problems we're having now. The truth of the matter is that if they'd have followed a course of increasing wages, we likely would never have come to where we are now, at least not the way we did. But then in looking at the mentality of the people that brought us here, if they hadn't caused it the way they did, they would have simply found another way.